Hello, and welcome to Analog Adventures. I'm Crispin Jeffrey Franco, a co-founder of Stacks Book Club, and joining me today is L.M. Sagas, the author of my favorite science fiction book of 2024, Cascade Failure. Cascade Failure is a rowdy, adventurous sci-fi story set in the Spiral, an intergalactic world where society is governed by three powers. The Trust, read the corporations, the Union, read the labor force, and the Guild, the peacekeepers who try to keep both sides in line. The story follows Hull, a guild deserter who's on the run and conveniently finds a ship docked with its cargo bays open and nobody watching them. The ship is helmed by an AI captain named Owen and crewed by Nash, who's a technical wizard and also serves as the ship's medic, and Saint, a grumpy XO officer whose loyalty to the guild is his guiding principle. Before they can deal with their fugitive stowaway, the M is hailed by a distress call from an abandoned planet and must answer that call. When they arrive, they find a mass grave and a single survivor. From there, the story begins to unspool in what is a classic space opera with space western vibes. LM, welcome to Analog Adventures.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to be talking to you today. Cascade Failure, like I mentioned in the opening, is my absolute favorite sci-fi book of 2024. It's your debut novel, which was quickly followed by the second in the series, Gravity Lost. So Cascade Failure came out in March, and then Gravity Lost right in July. What has it been like being a published author with not one but two releases in the same calendar year?
Oh, it's been awesome. And I kind of actually really I know it's a little bit of like a back-to-back thrill ride, sort of when you're talking about the publishing journey, but I actually really liked having them both come out in the same year because I feel like everyone's so used to sort of streaming where you get the whole season at the same time. And I'm that way too. So for my fellow instant gratification millennials out there, I'm really glad that people were able to get the first book. And, by the time you finish reading Cascade Failure, maybe it's already July and it's like, oh, I can just get the second one. Hopefully they liked it enough to go out and get the second one. But I thought it was really cool. And just the sort of all the messages that I've gotten from people saying they've read it and they've had a good time, or they've identified with some of the characters, or they feel really strongly about some of the relationships. It's just been so cool to have that experience and to have it with a book that I feel so strongly about.
That's amazing. Yeah, I definitely fell into that class of the book came out, it had been on my TBR for a while. I finally found the time to jump into it, just plowed right through it, and then immediately found out the second one was coming just a couple weeks later, and was able to get an advanced copy through Libro FM and got ahead of that curve too. So to me, the story has so many of the classic science fiction ideas and tropes and archetypes that I'm looking for in science fiction. And what's really interesting, and I don't know if you have a thought on this or a perspective on this, but as we were sort of looking back at the 2024 release schedule, especially with science fiction, it really felt like space operas were sort of missing in that landscape. So you're the author of two now. What was that publishing journey like? Did you face any challenges with this type of material? How were your submissions, received?
Yeah, so actually, I think it's a little bit sort of the standard publishing story. It's a little bit you wrote a good book and then it's a lot of bit luck. I just happened to sort of early on in the submissions process find an editor that really clicked with the project, and so we got picked up pretty quickly in the submissions process, which was really cool. And then there were a few other debut authors in the 2024 bracket, like Red Sight by Meredith Mooring. We all kind of talked in and amongst ourselves because we're like, there's maybe 4 or 5 of us surrounded by our 20, 30, 50 fantasy brethren. Let's hold the line for sci-fi. I do think we're starting to see more sci-fi just in general coming out. And one of the trends that I really like is that we're starting to see more sci-fi by people who don't fit the sort of classic sci-fi author mold. We are seeing more female identifying authors who are publishing. We're starting to see more LGBTQ plus authors who are publishing in sci-fi. And because sci-fi is a genre that has so much potential, it's really cool to see those voices coming into the conversation, because I feel like they're adding a lot, and I'm hoping that those additional voices will start to expand the genre more, and we'll see a trend of more space operas, more sort of space heists, romps, all that fun stuff, in the coming years. I think that would be really cool.
I agree, and I think especially like thinking about science fiction, I always feel like one of the fun things about science fiction is like the predictive nature of it, right? Like not everything in the Jetsons is true, but we do have automated cars. We do have robots doing household tasks, in and around our homes and our workplaces now, and kind of seeing some of the ideas in your book, some of the like science fictiony things that I feel are especially resonant today are AI, which you have what I would consider a fully sentient AI character who, over centuries of time has been able to teach themselves to feel in some capacity. So I'd love to know what your take on AI in our current world is and where you see AI going, both the positive and the negative of us enhancing automation in this way.
Yeah, so AI is a really fascinating concept for me, and I think it's also a pretty hot button issue because I think there sort of are those universally accepted as good uses for AI. You see it. I'm a huge sort of National Geographic. Let's watch. I think it's called. I don't even remember. It's one of the shows. They explore under the sea and they use AI to generate these 3D models of shipwrecks and things like that. That it's math that is fundamentally incalculable for a human brain, or that it would just take way too long, and things like that. That was kind of what I wanted to capture with Owen, because that sort of curiosity component of it, let's push the boundaries and do things that people can't do. You have a ship's pilot, a ship's captain who's capable of processing the complexities of space, in real time. And so applying that sort of curiosity aspect and that curiosity motivation from AI to a character for me was really important. There are sides of AI that as authors we're a little bit shy about, right? Because, when we're talking about generative AI that's based on authors' work on more of a personal level, that sort of stuff is a different category than what we're talking about with Owen. And so I'm always, because also in my day job, I'm a data privacy lawyer. So I'm always really careful, when we're talking about AI, I'm like, okay, so we have AI as in like artificial intelligence, as in this is kind of a life form unto itself. And then we have AI over here as in, you're plugging in a question and it's spitting out an answer. And, it might be scanning a bunch of people's copyrighted works without their permission.
Yeah, almost like exploitative AI. Yeah.
Right. So to
Yeah.
me, it's really cool to play in a side of AI that I'm really passionate about. But it also sort of coincidentally happened at the same time. We had a big burst of AI, that has some different implications.
Yeah, it's interesting the idea of like, yeah, AI gaining sentience isn't necessarily new, but I think about, Martha Wells's Murderbot series and Becky Chambers' Psalm for the Wild Built, the T.N. Monk series, and sort of like starting to see these different takes on how does the world react to AI when it is no longer controllable or or has made the decision to not be controllable. So that's a theme that runs throughout the first two books of the series that I really enjoyed. The other one that I think I'm enjoying a lot more and also sort of feels like on the horizon is the idea of like augmented humans. And in this series, we sort of have two different characters who have that augmentation. My take on it is in like two different ways. We have Hall, who maybe is not the main character, but at least kind of the driving force behind Cascade Failure, whose augmentations happened pretty early, maybe even pre-birth, if I'm remembering correctly. And then we also have Nash, who is the ship's, I'm sorry, yeah, Nash, the tech wizard slash medic, who's also has some augmentations, but of the what's the right word of the
voluntary
yeah, of the
variety.
voluntary, right, of the on the open market variety. So what's interesting to you about the idea of augmented humans, and what do you think the potential future of that in our society is?
Yeah, so I think sort of as people in general, our inclination is to change things in ways that make our lives easier, whether that's environmental, whether that's socio-political. That's our tendency is to say, well, what can I change about this thing that might have some deficits or that might not do what I want it to do in a way that makes it suit me better. And it was important to me to kind of analyze that through two lenses, and you highlighted them exactly right, through the sort of voluntary lens and then through the sort of involuntary lens that fits within the larger sort of philosophical issues that we encounter in Cascade failure. So with Nash, it's very much a choice. She is an engineer and she's also a doctor, and what she needs to be able to do and do well is detect signals, is to track those electrical impulses. And so she says to herself, well, I'm going to find a way to do that even better than I currently do, and I'm going to use technology to do it. And to me, that's sort of people that get you know implants to replace messed up shoulders or things like that. It's a choice that she got to make about her body that improved the way that she lived her life. And to me, that sort of agency is really important. And then you go to the other side of that, the other philosophical extreme with Hall, where it was the mining company that ran the planet that he was born on was basically saying, hey, if you let us make your baby into a super miner, we'll give you a credit or something like it. It becomes very capitalist, very almost mercenary. And it wasn't a choice that Hall himself got to make. It was a choice that was made for him, and he lives with the consequences of that. So for him, there had to be a trade-off, right? He's born on a dark planet, so his eyes are adjusted so that they can process low light situations better, which works great until he goes into a highlight situation. The same thing with his strength. He can push his body beyond what normal people's bodies can do, but there have to be repercussions with that because you are working with a medium like the human body that's inherently limited. And so Nash getting to use her biomechanical implants to her own advantage and being very proud of that and being very happy about that, kind of without reservation. And then you compare that, you juxtapose that with Hall, who is very much conflicted about it.
Right.
He's doing the best that he can with it and he uses it to his advantage, but there are also times when he has to deal with the fact that a choice was made for him that changed his life in a way that maybe he wouldn't have chosen for himself.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love so much about Cascade Failure and Gravity Lost is, if you want to enjoy the book as a space romp and you want some of action and some adventure and you want some of the classic, found family trope and the mentor archetype, that's all there. But there's so much more under the surface of the story in terms of capitalism and exploitation and who gets to make rules and who gets to pay the consequences. And there's so much actual meat to the story when you're building a universe from scratch. What does that look like?
So for me, and I kind of have to say, to me, it feels a little bit like I took the easy way out, because a lot of the things that you see in Cascade Failure and Gravity Lost are actually things that historically we've seen in our world. So, and just sort of took them to their logical extreme. Take, for example, the mining planet that Hall was born on. Well, we had company towns not so long ago. It was, an entire city or township that was run by a corporation, and the main purpose of that town was in furtherance of the corporation's goals. So that's something we've already seen, and sort of similarly in the larger plot concept of, we have this large corporation that's doing bad things and maybe getting away with it. We see that. And that a lot of the world building for Cascade Failure actually came out of a class that I was taking. It was just a white collar crime class, and seeing what corporations were doing and how the world was reacting to those, and the things that corporations, the power that it was able to take on, the sort of carte blanche it got in a lot of situations, taking that and then looking in the context of what was happening at the time, which was some of the big moves into space exploration, especially commercialized and privatized space exploration, and kind of thinking about those two things together, what happens. And I think Hall might have even expressed this in the first chapter. And I'm sure I was much more articulate than when I had the benefit of a Word doc and an editor. But it's basically, what would happen if we took these corporations, sent them out into space, and said, do what you're going to do? And it really is just sort of an application of things that have already happened in the much broader universe of the universe. Yeah. And so that's really where a lot of it came from, is just applying those concepts that already exist, and sort of furthering the old idiom of, history doesn't always repeat, but it sure rhymes, right. And that's kind of what this is.
Yeah, I think those are always the types of worlds that feel the most relevant. And then especially when you start to understand, like, oh, this seems so far-fetched, but then in reality, it's actually, like, to your point, it's something that's already happened somewhere in our history. We're just giving it to you in a new package, but like, it's not actually that far-fetched. It's, it's actually very, very commonplace in our, human history in some places.
Right. It's all been done before.
It's all been done before. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. What's next for you as an author? Is there more Ambit's Run coming? Is there something different coming? What's on the horizon?
Yeah. So right now, Ambit's Run, it was really always planned as a duology. And without sort of giving too much away, the end does tie up really neatly. And so we wanted it to be something that, you get 2 books and the ending feels really satisfying. So right now there aren't any more books planned. Obviously, I love the universe and I love the characters. So if the opportunity presents itself, I'd love to go back to the world and play around in that sandbox a little bit more. But right now I'm working on some different stuff, some other sci-fi projects. So hopefully we'll get those out into the world here pretty soon. I'm always going to write some found family. I'm always going to write fun, sort of feelsy science fiction, speculative stuff. So it's going to be not the same kind of stuff, but it's going to feel very familiar, and hopefully have a lot of the same things that people saw in Cascade Failure and Gravity Lost and loved.
Great. Well, that's exciting. I'm excited for that. We'll end and wrap up this conversation with one last question. What's the last great thing you've read?
Ooh, that one's always a hard one. Okay, so I'm going to give 2 answers on that one, because I'm currently reading something that I should have read a long time ago, but I finally got around to it and I'm loving it. And it's Gideon the Ninth.
Oh, nice.
I'm sure a lot of people are very familiar with that title. It's been recommended to me so many times, and I'm just finally getting around to it because I just love voicey protagonists. Hopefully some of that comes through in Cascade Failure and Gravity Lost. Then the other one, I would say one of my recent favorites is actually a book. I got a little sneak preview of it. So it's coming out soon, but it's A Cage of Starlight by Jules Arbeau. It's, if you're a fan of cool magic systems, if you're a fan of enemies to lovers, that kind of thing, it would definitely be your jam. But yeah, I think it's coming out maybe end of this year, early next year. So sorry, Jules, I don't know. I can barely keep up with my own release dates. Okay. But it was probably top 3, maybe even top read of last year. So I would definitely recommend people adding that to their Goodreads, TBR, whatever, and getting it when it comes out.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We'll definitely keep an eye out for that one later this year, early next year. Thank you so much. If you want to grab a copy of Cascade Failure, they are available now at your local independent bookstore. Go out, shop local, and support great, amazing authors like LM. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.